Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. For those I haven't met, my name is Claudia Panfil. I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at JourneyTrack. If anyone is not familiar with JourneyTrack, we are the AI-forward customer journey management platform, transforming how enterprises map, track, and optimize customer experiences at scale. We were named a leader in the recent Forrester Wave, the for customer journey management platforms. And for anybody who is interested in that, I will post in the comments a complimentary link to access that report. But for today, our session is part of our ongoing leadership webinar series. And we are going to talk about how leaders across industries who are doing, we're going to talk about how leaders across industries manage the sort of
executive buy-in.
Executive buy-in. Thank you. I'm sleeping here today. So it's not, the idea here is that it's not theory or hype. You're going to hear from Ania and Mark, who have firsthand experience in this. And so the idea is that you're going to walk away with meaningful things that you can do moving forward. So at JourneyTrack, we work with CX leaders across industries who are doing meaningful and high quality journey work. And yet this theme comes up over and over and over again. So before we dive in, I will do a couple of housekeeping items. Please drop your questions and comments in the comments section here. We're going to try to address as many of them as we can during the session. If not, we can follow up with you afterwards. And yes, we will share the recording. So maybe after I edit my intro a little bit here, but we'll share it with you after the call. So let me first introduce our speakers today. I'm excited to welcome Mark Slatin. Mark is the founder of Empowered CX. He's a CCXP and also professor of practice at Michigan State University, where he teaches customer relationship management. Before that, he spent 10 years building a CX practice from the ground up inside a 150-year-old financial institution, and he earned a whole bunch of CXPA innovation awards as part of that. Mark's work focuses on helping CX leaders drive meaningful change without formal authority. So that's exactly what we're talking about today. And I think we find this often in CX, right? There's not necessarily a direct authority related. So I think this is really great. Welcome, Mark. And then, of course, we have Ania, JourneyTrack's founder and CEO. Ania also works closely with enterprise CX leaders who are operationalizing journeys, connecting CX to business outcomes, and really earning sustained executive support. So she brings a strategic lens to how modern journey management platforms help CX leaders move from insight to action, and importantly, to influence. So with that, we'll jump in. And Ania, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Claudia. Hey, Mark, good to be with you here. For those that don't know, Mark also runs a podcast that is brilliant and has a lot of really great executive insights. Mark, you should drop in the podcast URL as well as why I introduce a little bit the topic here. So let's just go ahead and let me start with a simple observation for those that are sort of on this call. We all feel it, right? CX leaders, UX leaders, we don't really have an insight problem. What it comes down to is we have an influence problem. And really organizations today have more customer insights than they ever had before. And especially now in the age of AI, it's so much easier to sort of take that data. We run research, we collect VOC data, we map journeys, we identify friction points and opportunities across the experience. The work is thoughtful, the insights are awesome, yet influence is limited, right? And more important, business decisions are still made without those insights shaping the outcomes, right? And so this paradox, if you will, is really about strong insights and really weak organizational influence. Many teams that I see today, right? We now have over 100 customers, and many teams that we see today are they're able to get initial support, right? In getting even, they're building their CX practice, their journey management, operational model, and they're getting approved of these initiatives. They're receiving funding. Workshops are being sponsored, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the story, what I see, it sometimes depends on a single executive champion that has issues with, there's so many layoffs going on right now. It's crazy what I see across. We're in middle deals, and all of a sudden the players change immediately. And then all of a sudden, the team who's been there trying to prove value is having to do it over and over again. Priority shift, budget change, whatever it is, leadership changes at the top, et cetera, et cetera. And they find themselves, I see this often, I see so many teams finding themselves in the same cycle every year, explaining the value of CX, defending the work, trying to regain momentum. And it's what I'm seeing is that the goal shouldn't just be simply buy-in, right? The goal is buy influence, right? And buy influence for me, what that means is that buy-in means that someone approves your work. Influence means that really you're sort of moving it forward, right? You're really getting to the point where CX has influence, journeys are owned, measured, governed, connected to execution, and that's where it stops becoming an initiative and becomes part of the operating discipline, right? And that's different. I see a lot of companies who think they're doing journey management, but all they're doing is journey mapping for all intents and purpose, and they're staying there. They're never connecting data, which we all talk about doing, but nobody does. Not enough people do. Not that nobody does. Not enough people do, right? And really, I feel like this is the year where that should shift. I am seeing, honestly, 4 times as much as we used to see same time last year. It could be because we're now number one across the leaders, and that could be sort of influence to those that didn't know about us have now started to reach out to us, if you will. But nonetheless, even with the people who are our customers, they're sort of finally starting to connect, and we have a goal to get at least 90% of our customers connected to at least one data point. That's the simplest thing. So today, when you're going to when this session, what you're going to learn in this session, and I'm going to start moving forward to Mark, so he's got some great work to show you how to get leadership buy-in. In this session, Mark and I are going to explore what it takes for CX leaders to move, from temporary approval to sustained executive influence. We're going to talk about the trusted guide approach, which is Mark's sort of IP, if you will, building that trusted guide approach in CX leadership, what the buy influence looks like in practice, and then we're going to have some key takeaways and next steps as part of today's discussion. The goal is simple, not just to produce better CX insight, but to basically have those insights shape decisions, priorities, and investments across your organization. So with that said, let me now introduce again Mark. Mark, it's great to have been, for the last year sponsoring your podcast, but now I really want to move the conversation forward because I think I've met a lot of leaders and I love the framework you put together. Mark,
thanks so much, Ania. It's an honor to be here. You've been on my podcast several times, and you do an amazing job. And on that note, congratulations on the Forrester Award, that WAVE Award, for being not just one of the best, but really the top rated. And that's from a third party, an independent third party. So congratulations on that. That is, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
No, it's no small thing. And so I want to echo what you said. I love the way you broke it down with the idea of buy-in. A lot of, and I've even said this, buy-in is what we're aiming for, executive buy-in. The truth is that if we parse down that word, buy-in really, if you think about it, means that an executive is saying, yeah, I'm bought in. I agree with you, but I don't necessarily at that point own it. And there's a big difference between I agree with you, go get it, Mark, go after it, and I'm willing to make a commitment to it. And commitment shows up in the form of sacrifice, right? What am I willing to sacrifice? Time, resources, people. If you don't see the two hand in hand, then buy-in in and of itself is not good. So it's really important, I think, to differentiate. And I love the way you opened it up there. I would say a couple of realities that we're dealing with as CX leaders. And like you said, I went through the school of hard knocks as someone who was launched and led a practice in the Mid-Atlantic at a very 150-year-old bank. And so when we started, we had a tremendous amount of momentum because the CEO who hired me recognized that there was something missing from the ingredients of what went into an excellent customer experience. It was really around consistency. Like, we did it okay sometime, but we didn't do it okay all the time. And so that's why he hired me. I was doing consulting from the outside, and then he said, oh, look, I want to have an internal resource. And so initially, in the early years, and every CX discipline goes through levels of maturity, stages of maturity. We were in the early stages. So in the beginning stages of maturity, had a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement from the entire C-suite, formed a governance council. Every year we went on an offsite retreat at a resort for 3 days and took the entire executive team. And that went on for years until it didn't. Until other things got in the way. And you alluded to the different players, the priorities changing. The first big thing, I would say, many things, but the first big thing was an acquisition. And if you've ever been through a merger or an acquisition, like, everything else gets put on the shelf until that happens. And in banking, many other industries as well, rightly so, there's a lot of risk involved, because half or whatever percentage of customers are coming over didn't choose you. They didn't choose you. And they're being forced to, you're disrupting their lives by asking them to come over and learn your new systems and switch what bank, platform they're using. So early momentum, the reality is early momentum, you can't count on that to last. Don't live off your initial support. And so what I wish that I knew earlier was reality number 2, which is the fact is we're small teams, we're tiny budgets, and we have limited, if any, positional authority. So that's a reality you have to, as Ania mentioned earlier, this idea of influencing, right? We don't have the positional authority. And so that means we need to think about, how do we influence? So the shift in thinking, or reframe your thinking from the CX expert, the SME, the subject matter expert, to how am I going to be a change agent? Because that's really what you are. And by the way, people don't like change, especially bankers, those of you in banking. They don't like change, but that's your job. So a lot of times it feels like you're pushing a rock up a hill. It's frustrating. So I'm going to pause there and ask you, Ania, if you can relate to some of what I just shared.
For sure. I mean, I think 100%, Mark. I think the idea that just because someone picked you initially, then especially with acquisitions, that's when I see turmoil happen. We lose customers there and teams just go away. It's crazy what happens the next step, right? I have a bank that had 5 banks they merged with. And this is like a couple of years ago, so that'll kind of give you who it is, right? They were like buying 5 banks in, and it was pretty big, right? Acquisition, and they had been early customer of ours, and then the people that were initially there were no longer there, and it was a mess, right? And some new people inherited that had no idea, what they were doing, and it doesn't always work the way, but the new leadership has their idea of who they want there, and so be it. And I think that they have I think with anything, I always love the idea of influence. I think I learned this early in my career. When I was at IBM, I got picked in this like top 10 women across the globe, right? That they were young thing. And they sent us to a bunch of executive training. And one of the early trainings was that. And I think I got that so neat. And really, even when you're thinking about like what that means in practice, is like getting the buy-in, speaking to the people that might be influencers outside of the conversation, having some side one-on-ones before you go into these meetings. I learned a lot of little tactics that I'm sure you're going to get through here today, but yeah, I've seen it my whole career. I think that's something that it's so true and pivotal in our work period.
Yeah. Well, and I applaud you for bringing people like me, and smarter people on to partner with, to talk about not just the tool that Journey Track as a tool, but as a strategic solution to gain influence, right? Leaders. And your platform, the Journey Track platform, isn't just paper on a wall. right? It's something I wish I had when I was a CX leader, because I had paper on a wall.
Mhm.
And if you're not understanding and communicating and socializing, democratizing the customer journey across the organization, you're really missing something. But then what your tool does is provides it not just a one time, not just a once and done, but an ongoing living tool that can help support CX leaders who are trying to gain influence. Is that
Yeah.
yeah. So let me, if I could, share what I spent. And you mentioned I teach at MSU. They have a customer experience management master's degree. I've been in that program for 3 years, and I've taught in MBA programs. I was on the board of CXPA. Like, what keeps coming up for me with the patterns that I see boil down to 5 different areas when it comes to this topic. And I developed some courses around this. I'll talk more about those later, but let me just share with those with your audience what those are. And the first one, and there are 5 different courses. The first one's building trust. So we're going to talk more about that today and introduce something called the trust equation, which comes from a book called The Trusted Advisor. Because without trust, all the other things I'm about to talk about really don't function. You will get stalled, or you get limited results. The second one, and this was an aha moment for me, is becoming a trusted guide, right? Trusted guide. So the series is called the Trusted Guide series, all these 5 courses, but it's the shift from I have to do everything as a CX leader. I've got to push the rock up the hill by myself. I've got to prove this, have all my ducks in a row in a silo, kind of work in my bubble, and then come out and say, hey, look what we've got. So it's shifting from being the hero to being the guide. And it's reframing. It's a real reframe that was an aha moment, because when I got into trouble was when I leaned on my own efforts, tried to do everything myself, and took on the role of the hero and kind of submarined my own work. Right. And so the third one is making the business case. So you were alluding to that as you described the journey track, is how do you make it to different audiences, particularly the people who have the most power and influence in the organization, the key stakeholders that you need to, but others as well, is how do you make the business case? So you need to do that. We'll talk about not just the voice of the customer and CSAT and CX metrics, and even just talking about mapping a journey. It's how do you convert that to the language that they want to hear it in, that they're used to hearing it in. And then fourth is stakeholder mapping and influence. So you also alluded to that as well at the top, Anya, which is understand who this group of people is that are your key stakeholders. They're not all the same. They shouldn't be weighted the same. You shouldn't dedicate your scarce resources the same to all of them. But the landscape does change, and you need to keep it updated and make it an active document. So that's the fourth one. The last one is building your CX roadmap. And that is, a long-term plan, at least 1 year, maybe longer, that communicates to leadership what your plans are. If you want to get influence, you have to get plans. Now, I want to say building trust is the core of it all, but none of this should be done in a vacuum. You need to build a guiding coalition, as Cotter says, because you can't do it yourself. You can try, but you can't do it yourself. So you need to enlist the support and really do a good job of building trust and building relationships. Let me stop there and see if Anya, if you have any additional thoughts.
No, I think I think you're right on point. From a trust creation perspective, and trust equation perspective, when CX leaders they demonstrate credibility, reliability, to your point, ability to not make yourself the hero, right? Less, what I would call a low self orientation of sorts, right? Where you don't have your sort of own personal agenda. That's when trust starts to become sort of part of that equation, and the the actual change management within an organization starts to shift. I've seen this now. We've worked with enough organizations over the last 2 decades. For those that don't know, I've led a large, customer experience research and UX research practice that I own as well, called Key Lime Interactive. And we were working for for 2 decades, if you will, on our sort of these large engagements. And I've seen this even before, if you will, creating Journey Track 5 years ago, right? And so to me, like, those leaders that undermine this and they don't think this is important and they try to become the hero, that's where they're easy to be changed out.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap, the hero
It
trap.
is. Yeah.
It's so easy because when things, I mean, there's so many reasons, but one of it is when things aren't moving at the speed. I know I'm guilty of when things aren't moving at the speed you want them to, you start to fill in the gaps and you're like, I'm going to do more, I'm going to do more, and I'm going to do more. It's the exact wrong thing to do. So what I'd like to do is share with your audience the trust equation, which comes from a book called The Trusted Advisor that was written way back about 22 years ago. But in it is this equation, this formula, if you will, that it might as well be called the trustworthiness equation, because that's really what it calculates. And so a couple of definitions: you have the trustor and you have the trustee. And so the trustor is the person doing the trusting, and the trustee is you, because you are wanting to have that person trust you, and your trustworthiness is how that gets measured. You can't necessarily control why other people will or won't trust you. You can only work on your side of the fence and ensure that you're doing the things that you have control over. It's a serenity prayer, right? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. So that's really what that's about. So let me lay this out for you. And it's simple, really, because there's only 4 components in design, but it's profound when it's applied. So the T is on the left, T equals, and then you've got these 3 variables in the numerator: credibility, reliability, and intimacy, all over this denominator called self-orientation. And we'll be sharing with your audience a visual, a PDF that they can get, that'll be sent out. Claudia will be sending that out to them as well. So let's talk about the first 2, credibility and reliable. They tend to be more on the rational, logical side. Credibility is really the expertise that you bring or perceive to bring. And so an example of that is, how confidently you speak when you give. If you're navigating directions and you're looking for directions from someone, and they're saying like, "Well, I think you make a left over by the McDonald's, and then I'm not sure if it's a third right or so their credibility drops based on how. It's not just what you say, but how you're saying it. And there are things that you might bring to the table, like I have a CCXP, you're a CEO of an organization, the doctor has a lab jacket, a lawyer may have a certificate. Those are things that add to credibility. And then reliability is even simpler. Reliability is just, do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you follow through? These are things that both of those things can be pretty easily measured. And in a minute, I want to talk about all 4 of these and potential ways that we can, as CX leaders, and also as people who are fortunate to have the Journey Track tool, can amp up, can improve on each 4 of these to improve their trustworthiness. But before we get there, let me share the other 2. So the third element in the numerator is I, and that's intimacy. And there, what we're talking about, and that's kind of an odd word for business environment, intimacy, but it's intentional and it's a rich word. And what it means is it's about psychological safety. Do I feel safe with you? Are you a vault? Right? That would be one aspect. Can I share something confidential? If I share something that is funny, will you laugh? Will you know to laugh? If I share something that's sad, will you know to cry? So do I trust you in that way? That's intimacy. And then all of that is over self-orientation, S at the bottom. And what we're talking there, what's your focus? Is your focus on you and what your interests are. You're so in your head and preoccupied about how you're coming across. Are you nervous, anxious, thinking about what's for dinner tonight, preoccupied on your cell phone, or obviously focusing on making the sale, right? Versus are you focused on them, the other people? And it's easy again to fall into the trap. Um, and so those are the four variables that make up the trust equation. And Trust Advisor Associates actually have an assessment you can take at their website if you want to get a high level version of your own trustworthiness based on answers that you respond to. But so let me pause there and get your thoughts as I shared those four, how that kind of relates to our world.
Sorry, I'm having apparently a gardener who's decided to go right outside my window. So
Doesn't
sorry.
he know we're having this
I
conversation?
know. I'm like, great timing. So I think a lot about what you said, right? I also, as you were talking through, I was like thinking I recently listened to the book on from Mel Robbins, the let them and let me theory, if you will, for those that, right?
Yeah.
Simple. It's the same thing. Stoicism, serenity prayer, let them is sort of like, versus let me, right? So it's really what can you influence, right? It comes down to sort of that, how much, what can you really, when you think about it vis-a-vis the trusted equation, I just think, obviously being able to have intimacy with and sort of that, sort of that safe relationship is definitely something that you can't come, it takes a delicate balance. And I'm curious what you have seen. I see some people being a little bit too rough or think they know it all, and that sort of kills their ability to do that. And so, initially they might have credibility because they have this great sort of background and expertise. I often see problems with reliability, right? They start getting so in their head, and they, even through like that, like even like consistently reporting and being and thinking about like sort of the metrics back and the things that are happening, and being that consistency is something that I find a lot of people, when things get really busy, they just forget about.
Mm-hmm.
And then just being, I think if you go, I think back, one of the things I want to make sure I say is I think through like intimacy, your stakeholders, your peers, they have their own pressures, and being sort of self-aware of those, that is a lot that you have to think through as you're, thinking about how to influence them and the like. And so I don't know, Mark, I think this framework is excellent from that perspective. It gives leaders, and in our case, CX leaders, something to really lean into, so that they don't undermine trust in their own sort of ways. And I think
Yeah.
to your point earlier, a lot of us are guilty, and at one point or other, of not doing great, failing along the line, right? That's okay. You just pick up and start again, right? And just try to amend, right? I'm curious, I mean, of examples where you may have seen that in your practice.
Yeah. So when I love those examples as well. When I think about reliability, you're absolutely right. Like it's easy to say you're not going to, or just stop sharing reporting, for example. You think maybe, well, I'm the only one who cares. I'm the only one who knows. No, they're watching, and you have, remember, you're going against headwinds for all the reasons we talked about, right? Limited budget, tiny group, no positional power, or other priorities like you just shared. So you've got to do everything you possibly can. And those five things are what we're talking about. But you also have to build those relationships. And so one of the examples is not following through on what you're saying you're going to do. The other piece of it is around that intimacy and self-orientation, which are more of the softer, I'm not going to say soft skills. I'm going to say importance. They're important people skills.
Mm-hmm.
And, as you lay out the landscape of your stakeholder map and you understand, I would ask you, do you know for each one of those key stakeholders, what is driving them? What's keeping them up at night? What are their business priorities for the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And philosophically, what's behind that? Like, I do this, what would they say is the way things ought to be, or the way things should be. That's important stuff for you to know. So this is what I'm talking about. You can't, if you have a high self-orientation and you're focused about being the hero, you're going to focus on getting your stuff done. But if you're saying, I want to be a trusted advisor and I want to build trust, I'm going to be really focused on them. And I'm going to be listening carefully. I'm going to be listening, not to come up with an immediate solution, but really to get to know them and get to know them better. And some people, you'd be surprised, will give a lot up if you just ask and prove to them that you care more about them and their goals than your own.
I agree with that. That's so true. It's interesting. There's a couple things that came up there as you thought through this. I think it goes. One of the things that I think philosophy that's always been sort of core to just who we are as a team is really listen. I mean, if you think about it, we're a CX company, so we need to be listening to our customers, right? At the end of the story, we're delivering that. And I think one of the things that stood out and sort of what we were super proud of when that Forrester report came out was that we're the only ones in the leaderboard that got the halo, right? The customer halo, which means we were very intentional to listening to our customers. And I think that gave us that. One of the things that came out of listening to our customers, and it goes back to the issue with, CX leaders just being so overloaded and having an ability to maybe report and create, reliable sort of follow through. One of the features that we have is called storytelling AI. And what that does for leaders, it basically allows them to basically take everything they've put into the journey map, all the metrics, all the persona stuff, and then define an audience. Hey, is this going to go to Mark, who's this type of leader, and talk a little bit about what, you may want. Like it goes back to you were saying, and what his, in this case, Mark may have specific goals. And so if you know those, put those in, and just maybe he's very metric driven. He really cares about, making sure that the ROI of, his blessing of this investment is held through. So to make sure you focus this to be very ROI driven, and as opposed to maybe having someone in product who's more like really driven around features or something else, let's just say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so we built a tool. We basically built something that creates a report in a few minutes. And it's something that helps CX leaders sort of consistently maybe report out some information, as opposed to, because I've been on the other end of that, when we were doing this the hard way, doing, and kind of slicing and dicing. Every time someone asks you to slice and dice the data different ways, it's a headache. It's another 40, 60 hours of work, right? And
right.
So we wanted to listen to that and consistently do that. So for us, we created a way for you to do that in minutes, as opposed to spending hours, days, potentially even weeks sometimes creating that, and then not being, reliable in that perspective. So for us, I mean, I think we're constantly trying to listen to our customers so that we can, create that credibility, that reliability, that, understanding of their own pressures and the like, and not really be the hero necessarily, I think we're so in that perspective, but really just be their advisor. Right. And I think that shows in the results we got. Right. And so not that I don't feel like we were a hero because we really did it because our customers kind of leaned in, we listened to them, and then also just made sure that we met their immediate needs, right, in that perspective.
Yeah. And just to affirm what you said about being able to use the output of the journey track system for leadership. For example, you mentioned product might have features as something important. CFO might have ROI. Is having done that work up front and building trust with people and really listening to them individually, because everybody's different, is how you apply and use the information that is available to you. Because as you said at the top, there's no shortage of insights. Everyone listening who's involved with CX knows that there's a ton of data. It's not that we're short, but it's how to use it, and not just how you think it should be used, but really knowing the people involved and speaking their language. And that's going to be really, really critical.
I've seen teams do stakeholder mapping and things like that. I'm curious, what's your take on building influence systematically? What kind of ways have you done that in the past and that you've seen worked well?
Yeah. So at a high level, and there's one of the courses that is going to be coming out in a couple of weeks is called Stakeholder Mapping and Influence, and essentially, it is understanding, sitting down and saying, who are the people that are my key stakeholders, right? Who? Let me just start off with a list. From the list of people, who they are, what their role is. Then I say to myself, what is the power and influence that each
Hmm.
one of those people have?
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, and so
You
you
almost read
become
about power and influence like that. I've seen
power
the
and influence.
circles. I've seen the
Yep.
circle view where like, or are you
So
putting them in circles or in a grid?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is sort of the super next step. I love that. So you've got, let's just imagine, high power, high influence on the top right, and then low
Yeah.
power, low influence on so there's different ways on how much time, energy, and effort, as you might imagine, you want to spend with each person. But once you've done that, you've listed it out, let's say on a spreadsheet of this group of stakeholders. You're not done. Then you map it into this quadrant, but you're still not done. At that point, what you do is you create lines that connect between those stakeholders. And so
Yeah.
you can say to yourself, Anya knows Claudia, and they go to lunch every Tuesday, or
There's
they
influence.
work they
Yeah.
work closely together,
That's the way I've seen it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then the thickness of the line would represent what you believe is the depth of their relationship, right? How well. So now you've got your map, but you're still not done. The last piece is the size of that bubble that would have your initials or name in it, and that would be the degree to which you have power and influence. So now you've got this visual map, and this is really not necessarily to be shared with people outside your team, because it's your own assessment, right? Maybe totally wrong, maybe totally right, but at least you're starting somewhere. And now you're saying, okay, if it's someone who has low power, low influence, I may send them a communication along with everybody else on this list once a month. Here's a copy of our most recent journey tracking report, or a voice of the customer report, whatever. And here are the top 3 things our customers are saying about their experience with us. And that's all you need to do. You don't need, because you yourself not only have limited budget and limited people, you have a limited amount of time.
Would you categorize those as your blockers? I've seen like where people talk, that sort of group of resistant stakeholders or potential like secondary stakeholders. I've seen them where people categorize them as like I'm trying to think now. Geez, champions, decision makers,
Right. Adversaries,
blockers, influencers, and like.
and those are great labels. And adversaries, right? So are they champions, or are they adversaries? And it's just important to know that if they're adversaries and that they're very important to you, you got some work to do.
Yeah.
You got some work to do on building that relationship. So those are important things to do, and not to wait until the last minute. That's a mistake that I did. This is part of your strategic plan as a CX leader, is really understanding this map, understanding who are the key people, understanding a strategy on how to allocate your own time, and where you should be maybe, having meetings with people who are key people, and getting to know more about them and their goals, and really getting clear, understanding what it is that's most important to you. It could be, we talk about revenue, 3 pathways: revenue, cost, or risk, right? So understand there are 3 value pathways. What's most important? Is it revenue? If the chief revenue officer, you bet. That's what. If it's finance people, it might be more about cost or operations. And if it's a chief risk officer, what he or she is going to care about is reducing or minimizing risk. So how do you frame that out when you're communicating to those leaders?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, at Journey Track, when we have done sort of stakeholder maps, if you think about it, we have our chief customer officer, who's our sort of champion, if you will.
Right.
Our head of CX is maybe the decision maker, along with the CX, like anybody in the InfoSec team. They care about securities and our SOC 2 and ISO stuff. The CFO really cares about ROI and the like. And then if I think about, I think about each of the roles, each of their influence, and then their likely concerns. And if I have to address, like today, this morning, I was on a call with a major insurance company in Europe, and we were just talking just through, so data residency and the like. And I just want to I have to make sure that they understand that I have in-country data residency, that data's not coming out. And once I check them, and there were ISO and and I have to use certain language, right, just to make sure I can appease them. And then we move forward from that point on, right? And so there's each stakeholder in your sort of buy process, or like whatever buy-in process, if you will, has certain concerns that you have to like know what they are. To your point earlier, and if there's an influencer, the thing that I learned back in my IBM days, meant like whatever 25 years ago or whatever it's been now, was really like sometimes that influencer's got an ear. Like maybe Claudia has been having lunch with this person. So if you're all of a sudden if you can't get to, let's say, Rob, who might be the decision maker, Claudia can maybe get you there quicker. You know what I mean? And get like, right. Oh yeah, like I love Mark. Mark's awesome. You're talking to him, great.
That's right. That's why I say trust is so critical. It's the core thing. Without it, because if you think about it, if people that you trust highly, you're more inclined to accept what they say on face value. You're more inclined to move quicker on their recommendations. You're more inclined to, make a decision versus have it sent to committee. And it's huge. So that time, it seems like it's a lot of time, it's a lot of investment, but it can really pay dividends. And by the way, the opposite is true, right? If they don't trust you, you can have hard facts. This is going to cost us this much. Your recommendation, your proposal, your recommendation is solid, it's concrete, but they don't trust you for whatever reason. And so they're going to find something wrong with it. They will. So the opposite is true. And your job is really so one of the other things at the top is you mentioned empathizing with them and all they have going on in their world. Is you're not the only one. I think about the visual of a bunch of fish at feeding time with their mouths open. Don't be so hard on yourself, but realize there are other fish that have good proposals that are not even related to your proposal to help the organization. And so oftentimes it's an emotional decision. They'll never say that, but the emotions are based on trust, who I like, who I'm used to dealing with, whatever. So that's why this is just so core and so critical, is to start. It all starts with trust.
All right, let's now do like a little bit of a rapid exchange.
Yeah.
Signs that you've crossed the buy-in to buy influence. What's your take? And then I'll give you my take.
Well, yeah. So you get invited to meetings rather than having to ask. I mean, that's one of the big ones. And people are saying, we need your opinion on this before we move forward. That's one of the biggest ones.
To me, it's you're asking for permission and buy-in, right? Versus buy influence, you're being asked. To your point, you're being invited. They're starting to ask you to help them to shape decisions and the like. And so, they're starting to discuss things like revenue, retention, operational efficiency, and likes. And now we're kind of in that point. What's your take? Next topic. What's your take on how CX leaders earn a seat in strategic conversations?
Well, I think there's no magic bullet, but we talked about trust, right? So building that relationship with them, the trust has to precede, your expertise or your plans. All these things I say are important, and they are. CX is very much a yes and business, but it all has to start with that. So it's the investment in the building relationships. Understand yourself, understand your own trustworthiness. And we talk about the formula. Where is it that you think you might need to grow in, because you might come across as more self-oriented. At Michigan State, this is the first class. It's customer relationship management. Relationship's the middle word there of that. And so we say, take the trust assessment. Where do you see yourself as needing help? And what are some potential things that you can do to close that gap? So to me, that's what makes a difference.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize when you said, I was thinking CRM, like you were teaching them CRMs. I was like, that's really weird. And I had a moment there, but I realized now you're just talking about that. That makes sense now. It adds one and one. Because when you said that earlier, I don't know why I was thinking CRM as the word versus talking about the relationships. Thank you for that. But I don't know, to me, I see a lot of people, and I'm so like, it's already nauseating. I've heard people, oh, well, you need to learn how to read a P&L and this and that. And I'm like, no, you need to learn how to talk about business outcomes. It's not learning how to read a P&L. That's never been part of it, right? To me, I think if you understand some of these initiatives, when you're building that and you're able to talk about outcomes, because if you think about it, back to your stakeholder example, the business unit owner is the one with the most, like, that's the person who needs to figure out whatever to improve operational cost or to improve some outcomes from a CX perspective. And so to me, like, if you're not necessarily going to get earn that seat in strategic conversations because you're bringing a journey map per se. Even as a journey mapping company, I will tell you that's not what's going to take it there. What's going to take you there is actually the outcomes of that report that I was telling you with storytelling AI. It's really about like those insights that are like helping the business run better and really tying it to like the objectives and doing that. That's how I think you earn a seat. Like, it's not learning how to read a P&L. It's really learning how to talk business outcomes and showing insights that help them run better, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
Well said.
All right, so now common mistakes that quietly undermine executive trust.
Well, I think one I mentioned at the very top of realities is that we assume that we can rest on our laurels and assume that whatever reason we were brought into the organization, whatever momentum we had going in, that the momentum's going to continue. But no, it's a long game, not a short game. It's a crock pot, not a microwave. And
I love that. That's awesome.
And let those ingredients brew, and the flavor tastes better over time when they're working together. Also, there's a little bit, there's a little bit less control that you try to do as a hero when you think about it as a crock pot. There's a certain amount of patience. It doesn't mean you stop moving, but there's a certain amount of patience with individuals realizing, okay, I can't meet with this adversary who's really high engagement, really critical to our move. I can't meet with them every day for coffee. I could, but they would probably call the police. They'd be like, what are you doing here again? So there's a certain amount of patience that you would need. And that means pacing and so forth. But yeah, that would be the first one, is don't rest on those laurels.
I love that. That's amazing. I never thought of the crock pot. That's a beautiful, I love that analogy. I have to use that that's a great one. I think that's a keeper. Thank you, Mark. I think there's a lot of the common mistakes people do is basically they lose credibility because their insights, especially as CX leaders, right? The data that they have accumulates, but nothing is visibly changing, right? And there's no clear path to execution of sorts. Maybe they're relying on a single executive champion. That's when things are bad. Like I learned that early in my career. I had a big global financial company, and I only had, one executive champion. And if that person goes away, a couple $1 million worth of business can go away quickly overnight, right? And so same thing happens. You had one executive to earlier, the beginning conversation, right? You have one CEO that comes in that's really like into CX, but now it shifts, and then or you merge or you're doing some other thing else, and that breaks that. That ability for you to build that internal credibility because you haven't done your work to get to know all the other stakeholders who can be part of that equation later, right? It goes back to even your stakeholder mapping of sorts, whatever method you use, but just having some method to really understand that, I think, is key to success. So next question, how to course correct when influence stalls?
Well, it does happen, and you got to first look at the reasons why. Like, be honest with yourself. Why is it happening? If you're in the middle of a merger acquisition, or there's a system conversion, that could explain it. You may not be able to get the resources you need when something is really happening that the organization sees as high risk. So that's one of the things to me. And then secondly is, once you understand what that is, go back to those people that are big influencers and ask them why they think it's stalled. You built a relationship. Hopefully that's part of the benefit of building that relationship, is you can ask them honestly. They may not know, but they're probably, if they're high influence and they're close to it, they might be able to give you that answer. So those are a couple of things I would say.
I love that. To me, like sometimes that I would add to that is if you are influence is stalling, maybe your narrative is too complex, right? That sometimes you have to stop and simplify instead of like having one clear story versus like 10 different things you're trying to do, right? And I see that sometimes that starts to happen and just people don't know how to simplify and make it easier. I will tell you this, and now that over the years, I probably, had hundreds of people I've managed, and I've learned, like, as you get busier and busier at the top, like, it's almost like, even though you might be generally a smart person, it's just so much stuff coming in at once. And sometimes you want people to tell you simply the things, right? So sometimes making it easy for them to understand it will kind of course correct things if it stalls, right? And sometimes it just comes down to, in my world, in journey world, just maybe having one high impact journey that demonstrates like measurable improvement, so they can use that as like the framing, right? To kind of go back to that, and then reconnecting back to like organizational priorities. Always kind of saying, this is this priority, or this is something that's coming from the annual report. That right? That to me, it does it. To me, CX earns influence basically the same way any other function does, right? By helping the business make better decisions, period. And so instead of, sort of thinking of yourself as a support function, but being a strategic partner, I think helps that playbook, in my opinion, right? If you will.
I agree.
All right. So let's see what else. So now we're moving into the last sort of 10 minutes here or so. I'm going to do 5 minutes. So I guess we have Claudia back here. I guess we're going to start moving into next steps and maybe some questions potentially.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions that came in that I wanted to make sure that we address. I think some of them honestly have been addressed already, and as you've been talking. And by the way, I love how many times you guys want to go have lunch with me. So I'm going to tell you that was a key takeaway for me. No, but one of the questions that came in, and I think they're looking for sort of like a very practical answer, right? So what do you say to a CFO who views CX just as a cost center and not as a growth lever, right? And I think we've talked a lot about how to present information, but I think that a lot of times CFOs tend to be especially tough for CXers, and I will also say for marketing folks like myself. So any advice that the two of you have on that would be great.
Yeah, to me, to me, it comes back to saying you got to reframe it. You got to frame it to reducing operational inefficiencies or friction points, right? And not talk about it in that perspective, right? In fact, at the Institute of Journey Management, we've been talking about this at length here, and just like, I think it's endemic across we've seen it across all the competitive vendors and strategists and people who are part of that community. CFOs, they really care about efficiency, right? So, you frame it better, reduction of support tickets, churn, reduction of manual interventions, whatever you call it, call center volume going down, whatever. For them, it's very much about the financials and the outcomes. When you have scattered CX initiatives, as opposed to focusing, investing on like something that really plays into like revenue, retention, and costs, that's where I think what I would just is make sure you sort of very clearly, succinctly do that. And it goes back to simplifying it to those terms for the CFO, in my opinion.
Yeah, great. Those are great real life examples. Maybe not to contradict that at all, but as I go back to the trust equation, I think about getting to know people and understanding what their goals are. What are they saying? What are their underlying goals? What's their philosophy about the goals? You understand that deeply, then if they could give us actually the language and the descriptions, the descriptors that they're looking for. In the courses that we set up, I think it's the third course, Making the Business Case for CX, I use customer lifetime value as the actual metric, and it's looking at essentially a tranche, or they call it a vestige, a group of the same cohort of customers over time and say, how can we increase the lifetime value of those people? But having said that, my first conversation would be sit down, go back to Claudia's comment about lunch, and have lunch with your CFO or someone up as high in finance as you can, and say, here's what we're doing. We're trying to improve the customer experience, or have them coming back again and again, and telling their friends about us. And we want to measure that in a way the organization will receive well. What are your suggestions? Rather than say, we're using CLV,
Right.
That would be a mistake. We share that just as a model, just to say, here's one, but the best one is the one the CFO already has adopted or will adopt.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The last question, which kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with what you were just saying, but is about, you had earned somebody's trust, then for whatever reason you lose it. What's the best way to reestablish, especially if it's a key stakeholder?
I'm going to give this to Mark. This is a Mark one.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of statements that are around. It takes a lifetime to build trust, and you can lose it in a minute. Most of the time, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, because it depends on the depth of the trust, right? If you make a minor mess up or a moderate mess up, people know you, your character, your body of work. There's some forgiveness usually, because we're all human. But I would try and be vulnerable and go to that person, and rather than say, hey, I can see that you're not returning my calls, I'm not being invited to meetings anymore, rather than take an offensive or a passive aggressive, either way, just be vulnerable and say, hey, I want to work with you. I feel like I may have missed, I feel like I may have let you down, whatever the scenario is, and say, what can I do to help build our relationship? Because that's really what's important to me.
Yeah. I love that. I think like any human relationship, right? Like I think of different frameworks of things. Is there's a level of like, if they feel like you broke trust at whatever level, is like, acknowledge what happened without like any type of defensiveness. Basically, take responsibility. Typical stuff you will hear, like, in psychology, any type of frameworks you might feel. But like, really, I think it comes down to is also knowing how to speak the language, so that it's not like you did this, you did that. Is learning how to use the language that might make them feel. Because sometimes when people feel like the trust was broken, is because they felt like you blamed them, right? They feel like there's some level of like, there's defensiveness, there's some level of point in it. And so like taking ownership, I think, has always been my first playbook there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much to both of you. I want to be mindful of time. We're nearing the top of the hour here. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We'll send out the recording. Our next webinar, if anybody is interested, is actually with our client, Blue Cross of California, or Blue Shield of California, sorry. And that's going to be April 1st, and we're going to talk about AI specifically and CX for insurance companies. So hopefully you can join us then. But Mark, Ania, thank you so much for just a fabulous conversation, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you all
Thanks
for
for having
listening.
me.
Bye. Rock and
Thanks
roll.
so much.
Bye.